Hello and welcome back to another video. Today, after a hiatus, I am back in person in Arizona, which is Trump country. Trump won Arizona in 2020. If you account for the voter F word, as Red Eagle says it, I frankly am a little surprised at how things have been developing over the last couple of weeks that I was gone from YouTube in terms of making new videos, and I need to pump out a video on the runoff that is going to happen very quickly here in I think in a couple hours. So I need to get this video out really quick, and let's go ahead and watch. So right now we're at 50 Republicans and 48 Democrats. You may think, well, the advantage is clearly for the Republicans. Well, in this election between Warnock and Loeffler, Warnock being the black guy, Loeffler being the woman in the race, and you have Ossoff, who is the Jew, and Perdue. Those are another set of races going on. If Ossoff and Perdue go, whoever wins that will serve in the Senate until 2026. Whereas if there's an election between Loeffler and Warnock, then that'll be an election that'll be up again in 2 years, 2022, which is probably going to be a favorable year to the Republicans, assuming Joe Biden manages to steal the election. And what do I mean by this? I basically mean that if the odds are, let's say over 75% chance that Joe Biden is inaugurated in a couple weeks, then we do need to keep the Senate in order for us to make sure that we kind of, maybe get some wins in the Senate, or perhaps stop Joe Biden and others from getting their Democrat leftist agenda from getting through. And that is very important. Now, in my opinion, the runoff should have not have mattered. If you account for the fraud, I do believe John James won Michigan. I do, maybe McSally won. Maybe she didn't. I'm not sure. But point is that we would have won either way. But because John James had it stolen from him, McSally might have had it stolen from her. We are faced to deal with this very razor-thin majority. Now you may say, well, it's 50-50, so then we should be able to, contest the election. Have a complete deadlock, but that's how it works, because when there's a tie in the Senate, the vice president, who is in all likelihood going to be Kamala Harris for the foreseeable future, is she's going to be able to break the balance there in favor of the Democrats. So if it's a 50-50, it'll serve kind of like a 50+1 for the Democrats, which is going to be a problem. And then we're going to be at the mercy of having all the Republicans stay in line, as well as having defectors like Manchin or Kelly or Sinema or something along those lines, which is not likely to happen in a large capacity. So we're dealing with these two Senate seats. Now, if you go to the Trafalgar polling, the Senate runoff has multiple polls about it. As you can see, Trafalgar probably was incorrect in terms of Georgia. As you can see here, they had Donald Trump winning Georgia by 4.3, which I think is interesting because if you account for fraud, of course, Trump won Georgia, but I think it wasn't by 4%. It might have been by maybe 2%, 1%, however votes you want to see there. So clearly, Trafalgar is not the end-all be-all in this specific election because it's different, and Trafalgar tends to not do as well in the Sun Belt as they do in the Rust Belt, as Red Eagle has covered before. So when you look over here, you look into the specific demographics going on, and you look and they overestimated the white vote. That's a big problem here, is that they thought the white vote was going to be 61% when it turned out to be actually 57%. So that was a problem, as well as they overestimated the black vote, but as a proportion, it isn't as big of a deal. So as you can see there, it's not a good idea. It's not a great idea here. Now, if we move on to the next poll, and we're covering all the Trafalgar polls, this is going to be the end-all be-all video on the runoffs. You'd see Perdue winning there with the leans. It's actually Perdue 47.3 to Ossoff 48% with 4.7% undecided. So that's a pretty much tight election. And as you can see here, you had Loeffler winning by like 2% with the leans and the undecideds accounted for, which then means that you would have had Loeffler winning by 2 and Perdue tied, basically. So that's an interesting poll. If you move on to December 11th, which was almost a month ago, you would see that with the leans, it was still a toss-up with Ossoff and Perdue. And in the Senate election between Warnock and Loeffler, you would have Loeffler still winning by about 2%. So that's quite interesting. Now, if you move on to December 18th, that's a different scenario. Now, if you were to look at here, with the leans, it has Perdue winning by about 2%, which is interesting. And you would also see the Loeffler winning by 4%, which is odd. So that's an upsurge for the Republicans. We move on to December 27th, which is about 2 weeks ago. Or no, maybe like 10 days ago. I don't know. Point is that with the leans accounted for, it's Ossoff winning by like 1 or 2% against Perdue, which is interesting. You have Warnock doing slightly better than Loeffler, which is completely asinine and bizarre. I don't know what happened there. But now this is the final January 5th Senate runoff poll. And as you can see here, it has Jon Ossoff at 49.4%, with David Perdue at 48.5%, and it has undecideds at 2.1%. Okay, so what does that exactly mean here? It means that if Trafalgar is correct, that means that Jon Ossoff probably has like an 80% chance of winning at that point. Do I think that's the case? No. I think Perdue has a way better chance than 20%. Now, if you were to look at the election between Loeffler and Warnock, you'd see Loeffler at about 49.7%, Warnock at 48.4%, undecideds at 2%. So that would mean that Loeffler, in almost all cases, would end up winning the runoff, but Perdue losing. So that's an interesting perspective here, because if you were to give the Democrats one of the seats and then give the Republicans one of the seats, then it would be a 51-49, which means that if we take one Republican defector, then that might mean that we would lose on a given bill. So that would give us a razor-thin majority in that specific case. Quite interesting, right? Now, if you move on to the Senate report, you could look here, and when we look at the demographics, it does seem pretty accurate. Now, they do seem to be overestimating the black vote a little bit, but they also seem to oversample the white vote by an extra 2%. So that could be a problem for certain people, which means that it may make Perdue definitely lose and make Loeffler win. So it seems more and more likely that it's going to be one or the other that's going to win or lose. Quite interesting, right? Now, if we look at the needle, nothing has happened so far in the election. So by the time I upload this, just know I have no data as of election day. Now, if you look over here, Joe Biden, with the fraud, apparently, allegedly, beat Donald Trump by about 12,000 votes, which is about a 0.24% better than Trump, right? If we move on to the Senate, then you'll look at exactly what I'm talking about, where we do have a close election. As you can see here, Perdue did about 2% better than Trump did, and 2% better actually in Georgia than Donald Trump did. So it seems to me that if there's no fraud, that Perdue will win. And actually, I'll even go further. If there's zero fraud, everything is tight in an honest election, we would definitely win both elections. Okay, so right here, Ossoff should have lost the election. I think because of the fraud, it made Perdue go from probably what was going to be a 51 or 52% election for him to a 49.7, which led to a runoff. If there had been no fraud, I think that Perdue would have won the seat outright. Over 50% means no runoff. That basically means that he wins. Now, the Libertarian did spoil the election probably and screwed us over, so thank you, Libercucks. And in terms of the special election, from what I've heard, Collins and Loeffler combined resulted in 1% more votes than did Donald Trump, which means that they're both running ahead of Donald Trump. But there's also another thing that's going on, which is the sit-out movement, which is led by a bunch of retards that think that they're doing the right thing by screwing Mitch McConnell. What they're doing is screwing over the country. But again, so this goes to Nick Fuentes, who tweeted today saying, "Don't vote in the runoff. Screw you, faggot." That is not a good idea. That is not a good idea. We do need to win the seats so we can stop amnesty, so we can stop other things. And all this defeatist nihilism is feeding right into the Democrats' hands. So again, very stupid, very dumb. Okay, if you want to have your open season on Republicans, 2022 is probably going to be the time to do that, assuming Trump doesn't win. But again, we do need to really win these seats. Now, I think, and here's my prediction. Well, actually, let's look at the fake news polls first. Okay, let's look at the most recent polls. Let's look in the Real Queer Politics. As you can see here, the Fox group has it as a tie. Fox is terrible. If we go to, let me keep looking here. So right now, the Senate runoff between Perdue and Loeffler and Warnock has Warnock winning by 0.5%. Quite interesting, don't you think? So even the fake news aggregate has Warnock barely winning, which is very important. Now, if you look onto the Perdue-Ossoff race, Ossoff is winning by 0.5, which is just asinine. Obviously, one is going to do better than the other. So it's one, the aggregate is wrong, and two, this is fake news. So in that case, I do think that I do honestly think that we are going to be able to win this runoff. What do I mean by this? If we move on to the 2018 Georgia 7th, you could see Ossoff underperforming. Now, if we move on to, let's say, the Senate runoff here, you could obviously tell that Perdue did better than Trump, and that's even with the fraud, which means that if you have the same amount of fraud from last time, which may or may not be true, who knows what's going to happen, I think that Perdue would beat Ossoff. And again, you have the small fraction of people on the Republican side that will not turn out because they're dumb and they're retarded and black-pilled. In that case, that might screw us over if it's within 1% or something. But when we're looking at Loeffler, I think Loeffler might stand a better chance. You could really argue this, and I think it's because Loeffler is a worse candidate, but she's going against the black guy who's a worse candidate than Ossoff. He's a worse campaigner. He has more baggage. He's worse for the suburbs, maybe marginally better with the blacks, but that's not going to be enough, I think. And then when you look at the other race, you have Ossoff versus Perdue, and Perdue has more name recognition than Ossoff. He was already elected handily in 2014. He did already do better than Ossoff by 2% in the general election. And he did win over 50% of the vote in the general election if you account for the fraud, which makes me think, honestly, that if we do look at this, I think that Perdue will beat Ossoff. Assuming there's no fraud. Okay, because I need to hedge my bets now. Assuming there's no tomfoolery, I do. And again, the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, is that the name? Ratzenberger. He said that these votes will be counted by tomorrow morning, January 6th. Now, personally, it'll probably last longer than that because he's a liar and he's gonna burn in hell probably. But I think Perdue should win by 1 or 2% if there's no fraud, and Kelly should win by about 2% if there's no fraud. Now, what I think is important to notice is that the mail-in balloting is not as big of an issue apparently because I feel that the fraud will be more minimized because they really hated Donald Trump and not Perdue and Loeffler. And let's keep in mind that it would be awfully ballsy of them to commit the fraud when we already are on to them. So again, is the fraud going to kill them? Maybe it will. I honestly don't know. If there's no fraud, I do believe strongly that both Republican candidates would win. Now, because there is a chance of fraud, I don't honestly know. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say that Perdue is going to win by 1 to 2%, and Loeffler is going to win by about 2%. That's my estimate. I think they will both win tilt margins. Okay, so let's put this as tilt. I think we're going to have a 52 to 48, and unless something crazy happens, I think this is what's going to happen. Now, fraud could kill it. I wouldn't put it past them. Of course, they've stole the election already. Would they do it again? Definitely. That's definitely a possibility. But as you can see here, Perdue has a bigger base than Donald Trump has in terms of net of supporters or voters, and Warnock is a crappy candidate. Those two put together makes me think that both Republican candidates will win. I think the odds of them winning without fraud would be 65%. I think the odds of them of winning both with the fraud is like 52% or something. And I think the odds of one of them winning and one of them losing is about 30%. And I think the odds of both Democrats winning is about 25% without the fraud and about 45% with the fraud. So we're going to see what's going to happen here. I'm honestly not entirely sure, and that's what makes me feel really weird about this. It's really a queer election here. It's going to be very important who wins and who does not. Remember, the Democrats need to win both seats for them to take over the Senate, so they're at the disadvantage, and already they underperformed they underperformed us already on the general election, and we were already on to them to the fraud, so maybe they won't even try the fraud as much. We're going to see. Anyways, guys, do not mention Dominion. Linwood is a retard. Don't believe in any of those conspiracy theories. Take the Robert Barnes pill. Subscribe to the channel if you have not. Let's see if my prediction ages well. Again, it's both of them win tilt, but who knows what's going to happen with the fraud. Anyways, guys, thank you for watching. Goodbye.